Okay, let's get right into this explainer. Today, we're untangling the deeply complex, highly sensitive legal and ethical frameworks surrounding end-of-life choices. It's a topic that touches the very core of human existence, right? We're trying to balance medicine, morality, and the law. It's incredibly nuanced, and honestly, it's something societies all over the globe are actively grappling with as we speak. Our goal today isn't to tell you what to think. Instead, we're going to use the source material to clearly map out the arguments, the definitions, and the stark realities of how these laws actually impact real human lives.
To make sure we grasp these heavy concepts clearly, here is our agenda. First, defining end-of-life choices. Second, sanctity versus quality. Third, humanism and self-determination. Fourth, real cases with Nicholson and Priddy. And finally, global laws and UK policy.
All right, Section 1. Defining end-of-life choices. Before we can even begin to explore the legal battles or the philosophical debates, we absolutely have to establish a clear baseline by defining our terms. First up is euthanasia. The word itself fundamentally translates to a good or gentle death. But in a medical and legal context, it refers to a situation where an individual is helped to end their life before its natural end, specifically using pain-free medication. The whole focus here is on providing a pain-free exit using medical intervention to ensure the person is completely free from suffering.
Building on that exact concept, we have voluntary euthanasia. The key word here is voluntary. This specifically denotes that the medical intervention is a chosen path. It is explicitly requested by the patient themselves. This is a massive distinction because it centers entirely on patient consent. And just for context, this specific practice is legally permitted in regions like the Netherlands, Switzerland, and certain parts of the US.
Then we have assisted suicide. Now this term shifts the focus slightly. It's used when an individual actively seeks help to end their own life, again aiming for a pain-free or heavily pain-reduced process. Notice the slight shift in agency here compared to our previous definition. To make that difference absolutely crystal clear, look at this comparison. With euthanasia, an individual is being helped to end their life, meaning a medical professional is typically the one actually administering the medication. But with assisted suicide, it's about the individual seeking help to carry out the act themselves. So they might be provided with the means, but they are the ones who take the final decisive action. It is a subtle but incredibly important legal and ethical distinction that governs how different countries actually write their laws.
Which brings us to Section 2, sanctity versus quality. Let's see how those definitions sit right at the center of a profound philosophical divide.
The core of the ethical debate constantly weighs two really powerful concepts against one another. On one hand, you have the sanctity of life. This is the belief that human life is inherently sacred and holds absolute value no matter its condition. On the other hand, you have the quality of life, which focuses on the person's general well-being, their lived experience, and their level of suffering. When these two massive concepts clash, you find the very heart of the end-of-life debate.
So what is the crucial point of the pro-choice perspective? Well, they lean heavily into the quality of life argument. They argue that a fully conscious, rational human being should have the absolute freedom to choose when to end their life. They emphasize that people with incurable diseases want to avoid reaching those agonizing final stages. In this view, the right to die allows a person to keep control before the pain becomes completely unbearable. They argue that forcing someone to endure severely degraded quality of life causes what they call unnatural pain, and that nobody should be forced to live through that.
Okay, moving to Section 3, humanism and self-determination. To truly understand how these philosophical debates play out in real-world advocacy, let's look at the stance of one specific organization. The British Humanist Association, or BHA, offers a very clear perspective here. They explicitly reject the concept that the sanctity of life is something granted by God. Instead, they root their entire argument in human dignity and self-determination. In their view, the ultimate decision about whether a life is still tolerable or whether the quality of life has just deteriorated way too far rests completely with the individual living it, nobody else. And this brilliant quote from Humanists UK perfectly captures their core philosophy. They state they defend the right to life, sure, but they explicitly add, "We recognize that this right carries with it the right of each individual to make their own judgment about whether their life should be prolonged in the face of pointless suffering." That's a fierce defense of living by personal values, right? Having the autonomy to reject what they view as futile agony. Building on that philosophy, the BHA actively argues for legalizing assisted dying to ensure people have true choices.
But here is a super important detail you shouldn't miss. They do not reject palliative care, which is the medical care focused on relieving symptoms and stress. Actually, it's the opposite. They view options like euthanasia and assisted suicide as necessary additions to a truly patient-centered approach. They see it as one part of a comprehensive spectrum of care.
Next up, Section 4, Real Cases, Nicholson and Pretty. Because, it's one thing to talk about abstract philosophy, but it's entirely another to see how these laws actually impact real people.
Take a look at these two highly publicized, intensely emotional legal challenges in the UK. First, there's Tony Nicholson. In 2012, backed by the BHA, he challenged UK law. Tony suffered from locked-in syndrome. He was completely unable to move or speak. He repeatedly begged for the right to choose an assisted death, arguing that the existing law was basically condemning him to a life of increasing indignity and profound misery. Then there's Diane Pretty. Facing a terminal illness a few years prior, she didn't ask the UK courts for a doctor to end her life. Instead, she asked for permission for her husband to safely help her travel to Switzerland, where assisted suicide is legal, without him facing criminal prosecution the minute he returned home.
In a deeply sobering conclusion to their public and painful legal battles, both Tony Nicholson and Diane Pretty passed away while the UK laws remain completely unchanged. Their stories really highlight the severe friction between a person's absolute desperation for self-determination and the rigid, unyielding boundaries of existing legal frameworks.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Global Laws and UK Policy. So where does the law actually stand today across different borders?
When we zoom out and look at the global landscape, it's a real patchwork of different approaches. In the United Kingdom, both euthanasia and assisted suicide remain illegal, though there are some specific prosecution guidelines we'll touch on in just a second. Compare that to the Netherlands, where voluntary euthanasia is fully legally permitted. In Switzerland, the law permits assisted suicide. And in the US, assisted suicide is legally permitted, but only in certain specific states. So, geography dictates your legal options.
Now let's look closer at the UK. While the law is strictly prohibitive on paper, there are some critical nuances in practice. Since 2010, the Director of Public Prosecutions, or the DPP, for England and Wales, has issued very specific guidelines regarding assisted suicide. This is specifically geared towards cases like Diane Pretty's, where someone is helping a loved one travel abroad for an assisted death.
And here is what that legal tightrope looks like. The DPP clarified that prosecuting the person assisting is unlikely if two highly specific conditions are met. Number one, it must be completely obvious that the person dying had reached a voluntary, settled, and informed decision. It absolutely cannot be coerced or rushed. And number two, the person helping them must be wholly motivated by compassion. If there's even a hint of malicious intent or financial gain, prosecution is practically guaranteed. It's a delicate balance, trying to reconcile the strict letter of the law with raw human compassion.
As we wrap up this explainer, we are left staring at a monumental question. Seeing the strict boundaries of the law, hearing the profound arguments for the sanctity of life, and witnessing the agonizing human realities of cases like Tony Nicholson and Diane Pretty, we really have to ask, how should society balance established legal frameworks with the deeply human desire for self-determination at the end of life? It's a question that is not going away anytime soon, and it demands our most careful, compassionate thinking. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring this vital topic.